Welcome back to the podcast PATECCO speaks plain text. Today we are talking about a buzzword that has made its way from the IT security niche to the executive floors in the last 2 years. Zero trust, or identity is the new perimeter, is something we read everywhere, from the CISO newsletter to consultant slides. My guest has a problem with this. Albert Harz, special advisor at PATECCO GmbH, has been supporting companies in the field of security, IAM, and authorization projects for years. Albert, it's great to have you here.
Hello, Ina. I'm glad to be back at PATECCO speaking plain text.
You told me before the recording, zero trust is one of the most misunderstood concepts in our industry. Why?
Because it is sold as a product and it is not a product. It is an architectural principle and a decision that has fundamental consequences. But when you talk to ACIO today, he has heard from 2 or 3 vendors that they can sell him a zero trust solution. That's about as if someone claimed they could sell you justice. Justice is a principle, not a product. Zero trust is too.
But the principle is not new, is it? John Kinderbach from Forrester coined the term back in 2010.
That's right. And that's the fascinating part. We are talking about a concept that is now 16 years old, and it's only just now becoming widespread. Why? Because 3 things have happened that have definitively broken the old world. First, the cloud. Your workloads are no longer in your data center. Second, remote work. Since the pandemic, it's clear that in the office and on the corporate network are 2 different things. And third, the realization that most successful attacks in recent years have not come through the outer wall, but laterally, meaning through movement within the network after a single account has been compromised.
So the classic moat and castle approach no longer works.
He never really worked. We just convinced ourselves of that. The castle metaphor assumes that everything within the walls is trustworthy. That was already wrong 20 years ago because every insider had access. Every service provider came in with a VPN. Every maintenance technician stood in the server room with a USB stick. But we pretended there was a secure inner world. Zero trust ends this illusion. The phrase that summarizes the concept is trivial. Never trust, always verify. Trust nothing and no one by default. Verify every access, every time, based on identity, context, and risk.
And identity is the new perimeter means then?
That means, because you can no longer draw a network boundary, the only thing that consistently comes along with every access is the identity. The employee is in the office today, working from home tomorrow, and the day after that in a cafe in Lisbon. His device may change as well. What remains, who he is, and what rights he has to access which resource. That is the new perimeter. Identity plus authorization plus context.
Now I would expect you to say, great, then we all need to implement zero trust. But you sound skeptical.
I'm not skeptical about zero trust. I'm skeptical about the way zero trust is implemented in most companies. Let me put it bluntly. Most companies that talk about zero trust today haven't even done the homework of classic identity management. They don't know who has what rights. They have permissions that are 10 years old. They recertify with click-throughs, a task for executives without real added value. And then they want to implement a system that makes real-time risk-based access decisions. That's like teaching a baby to drive before it can walk.
You sound just like one of the consultants you are trying to distance yourself from.
Fair. But let me sharpen the point. Zero trust only works if 3 things are clear. First, you know who your identities are. Employees, externals, service accounts, technical users, all of them. Second, you know what rights these identities should have. Not what they have, but what they should have. That's a huge difference. Third, you can verify and enforce these rights in real time. Most companies fail at point 1. They do not have a complete list of their identities. And now they are supposed to implement risk-based policies? Difficult.
But the providers say that their zero trust platforms precisely fill these gaps.
Providers say a lot. What they do is sell you a tool that operates on a clean identity basis. They just don't tell you that this clean basis is a pre-project of 18 to 24 months. In the insurance industry, I don't know a single large company that has truly implemented zero trust in under 3 years. And those who claim to have done so have actually bought an expensive single sign-on and slapped the MFA sticker on it. That's not zero trust. That's a zero trust disguise.
That's quite a statement. Let's stick to the insurance sector. What's going on there right now?
DORA, the Digital Operational Resilience Regulation of the EU, mandatory since January 2025. It explicitly requires least privilege, regular recertification, identity lifecycle management, and privileged access management. These are all components of zero trust. The regulation has shifted the topic from nice to have to must have. And that is good. But it also leads to the introduction of what is essentially a long-term architectural issue under time pressure. And then shortcuts are taken that undermine the concept.
Which abbreviations do you see most often?
I see the following most often. First, MFA is implemented everywhere and called zero trust. MFA is a prerequisite, not zero trust. Without MFA, you aren't even at the starting line. Second, a zero trust network access is built in front of the old applications, and one believes that this is sufficient. It improves the network. But if there is an application behind it that cannot handle granular permissions internally, you haven't gained much. Third, zero trust policies are defined based on the roles that currently exist. But these roles are exactly the problem. They have grown historically, they are too broad, and they do not reflect the actual activities. Anyone who builds zero trust on a broken role model automates their own permission errors. Faster, more consistently, but still wrong.
Let me interrupt you briefly. You say that the role model is the actual problem. But zero trust promises to become more independent of roles through context-based decisions. Who wants to access what from where, at what time, and so on.
Good objection. Yes, zero trust aims to move away from pure role-based approaches towards attribute-based decisions. ABAC instead of RBAC. So attribute-based access control instead of role-based. In theory. In practice, every ABAC policy needs an anchor. And this anchor is usually still, what role does the person have in the company? If you haven't clearly defined this role, you can't build meaningful attribute policies. ABAC is more powerful than RBAC, but it is not the breakthrough from role discipline. It is the next level, which assumes that the previous level is established.
If someone is listening now and says, okay, we want to tackle this seriously, where do you start?
Not doing the tool selection. That is my most important point. Don't start by evaluating a zero trust provider. Start by taking an inventory of identities. How many identities do I actually have? Employees, externals, service accounts, technical identities, shared accounts. Who is responsible? What is each person allowed to do? This inventory is unsexy. It is painful because it reveals how chaotic the current state is. But it is the prerequisite for everything that follows.
How long does such an inventory take?
In a company with 1,000 employees and maybe 50 to 80 applications, it takes 3 to 6 months if you approach it seriously. For larger companies, corporations, and insurers, it takes correspondingly longer. But that is time that is not wasted. Rather, it is time you have to invest anyway. You can only spend it in two places. Either at the beginning, which makes the entire subsequent project faster, or in the middle of the implementation project, which then costs double and blocks the technical teams.
You mentioned insider threats earlier. How does that fit into the zero trust picture?
Very direct. One of the core ideas of zero trust is assume breach. You assume that somewhere in your company, someone is already inside. Whether it's a malicious employee, a compromised account, a service provider with backdoor access. The question is not if this happens, but when. And if you take that seriously, then zero trust almost follows naturally. You give no one more rights than necessary. You verify every access. You segment so that a single compromised account does not unlock the entire house. That all makes sense. The only problem is that it is culturally brutal. You are telling your own employees, I fundamentally do not trust you. And no one likes to hear that.
How do you communicate that?
Not like that. Not with the statement, we do not trust you, but with the statement, we are building a system that protects you by assuming that every account can be compromised, including yours. And when that happens, the damage should be limited. Zero trust is not directed against employees. It is a protective architecture for everyone, but that needs to be explained. And most companies do not do that. They communicate zero trust as a compliance measure, and then employees feel monitored. That is a communication error that can poison the entire project.
Last question. When you look at the next 5 years, will zero trust become standard? Or will it remain a buzzword that gets replaced by the next one in 2 years?
It will become standard, but not because companies are doing it voluntarily, rather because regulation forces them to do so. DORA is just the beginning. NIS 2 is heading in the same direction. In a few years, no insurer, no bank, no critical infrastructure operator will be able to do without a zero trust architecture, because the oversight will de facto require it. The question is not if, but how. And that is my message to the listeners. If you start with zero trust today, you have a 3-year head start. If you wait until the oversight comes knocking, you will be under time pressure and make poor decisions. Time pressure and IAM architecture do not go well together. It always ends in technical debt that will follow you for 10 years.
Albert, that was a distinctly different picture than what one usually hears about zero trust. Thank you for sharing this comprehensive view on zero trust in our podcast, PATECCO Speaks Klartext.
Of course, Ina, it was a pleasure for me to be part of PATECCO Speaks Plain Text again.